So thank you, Fernanda, for your introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I will explain how this webinar will be organized. First, this will be organized in two different parts. First, I'm Pablo Frias, and I will present the background of the analysis together with the different business models that we have defined to merge industrial flexibility together with renewables. Then in the second part of the session, my colleague Tomás Gómez will present the existing barriers for its full deployment of the different business models. At the end of each of these two parts, my colleague Lorenzo Simons will pose some questions in order to go in some details of the previously presented questions. Of course, at the end of this full seminar, we will have some open questions to everybody so we can have more in-depth analysis of specific questions. So as the cover of the title indicates, it is clear that this webinar will cover the definition of the different business models that will activate somehow the industrial flexibility in the system. The challenge that we are facing is that the key starting point currently in power system is that there is a need to, on the one hand, integrate more and more renewable generation, sometimes intermittent and sometimes less predictable, and on the other hand, electric-intensive consumers like the big industry are quite sensitive to the electricity prices, and somehow this clearly affects to the international competitiveness of the full industry. So that's how the project has identified the flexibility potential of the largest and most energy-intensive industry in the system, and through the creation or through the definition of different innovative business models, we will allow the industrial consumers to reduce the electrical cost and then bring some additional benefits that will improve the competitiveness of this industry. So the objectives that we are going into the details in this project are to define the most suitable business models for the exploitation of this demand flexibility. Once these business models has been defined, there is a clear need to quantify if the potential benefits that we can get from the industry flexibility to integrate renewables or to provide services to the system are enough. In case these benefits are really interesting somehow, there is a need to review which are the current rules that we have in the power system, both in the operation side and also in the economic side, to identify if there is possibility to the full deployment of these business models. And in case some barriers are identified, to propose some policy recommendations. These will be somehow the part or the second webinar that we will have next week. So the project focus, the project will cover somehow the most relevant industry or the electric intensive industry, from the chemicals to the treatment of metals, cold storage, water treatment, etc. And will apply to 6 countries in Europe. You can see in the picture, UK, Germany, Belgium, France, Italy, and Spain. So the first idea is to have a clear definition of a business model. So a business model can be understood as a set of flexibility business strategies, chosen from, on the one side, the industry or the industrial flexibility somehow in relation to its electricity consumption in order to generate economic benefits. These strategies could arise from combining a variety of instruments, which are the ones that you have in the table, in the rows and in columns, to obtain different economic benefits and savings. So in rows, what you can find is, on the one hand, the main sources of savings are clearly the energy bill and the reduced cost that we have for the energy consumption, and also the reduced payments that we have for network or other regulated charges. Moreover, there is a possibility to have additional revenues by providing other services to the system. System could be the transmission system operator or the distribution system operator. Now, in columns, what we have is the different available tools that we can identify in order to have the industry to grasp these benefits. In the first column, its own flexibility to adjust the load profile in the different time of the day to get the specific savings or revenues. In the second and the third column, we have the possibility to have contracts or interactions with renewable generation. This renewable generation can be installed in the facilities of the industry, which is the third column, or could be in another location or in another region, which is the case of the second column. So if we build a matrix with the different savings together with the tools, we can identify at least 5 reasonable and original business models. The first business model is quite clear, and it's happening, let's say, since industry has a clear access to the markets or has an importance somehow in the electricity consumption. This business model is called electricity bill reduction, and here the industry is facing a variation of the prices in the market or in a supplier. So then, by using its own flexibility, the industry is able to shift the consumption from higher to lower price periods, and there the consumer can benefit from this, from paying less somehow in the bill. In addition to these energy services, to these savings, the industry could also reduce the payment through reduction of network charges by using its own flexibility for reducing the peak and the peak consumption of the peak load in accordance to the network tariff. So usually in some countries, like in Spain, there is a fee for the use of the network, which is based on the installed capacity or on the peak consumption, and you can have a benefit for this kind of reduction. The second business model is called system service provider, and within this model, the industry can provide some additional services to the system. For instance, frequency control and balancing services to the TSO can provide some additional services to the TSO, for instance, improvement of the quality of service in the distribution network, reduction of congestions, and can also be part of additional mechanisms like capacity remuneration on or interruptibility. The third business model is called electricity supply contract with off-site renewable generation. So in this model, it is not only the industry itself, but there is a coordination or there is arrangement with a renewable facility which is not located in the premises of the industry. This strategy involves any contractual arrangement established between the renewable generator and the industrial demand, which is based on long-term contracts. For instance, a renewable generator could find it worthwhile to reduce the risks and uncertainties related to the production on the one hand, and also on the price volatility he's facing into the market. So this way, the renewable generator can secure the revenues somehow in the midterm and can ensure the recovery of the investments that they did initially for the installation of the power plant. So these are the benefits that can be obtained by renewable generator, but on the other hand, the flexible industrial demand could be willing to establish these kind of contracts also to have a more stable and predictable conditions for the prices, avoiding the volatility in the price or having additional benefits like a reduction of imbalances due to some kind of problems into the factory. The fourth business model is called bilateral balancing provision, and here, through the establishment of some kind of flexibility contract, it's not long-term base of energy. Now it's based on additional balancing services between, again, the industrial facility with a renewable generator which is not located in the premises of the consumer. With this strategy, it is clear that the industrial demand must somehow modify its consumption in order to respond to the signals that are sent by the renewable generator, so the balanced responsible party, which is the renewable generator, can reduce their imbalances and so the cost they pay to the system due to these deviations. The fifth model, and the final one, it's based on having these new or the existing facilities of renewable generation in the premises of the industry. So in this business model, the renewable generator or the renewable facility could be, owned somehow by the industry itself, or could be a third party that made the investment here. It is important that this way we can reduce both the energy consumption, so we can consume when there is wind or when there is solar generation somehow, and on top of that we can also reduce the peak consumption and therefore reduce the network charges we need to pay. So these are the full table of the 5 business models that we have identified. And now I will leave the word to Lorenzo. So we can have, let's say, we have designed 3 different questions that Fernando will now pose you, or will you include it into you can see that now. So the idea is that now you can take around 1 minute to try to answer the 3 questions, and at the end we will have a short discussion on them. So thank you.
So now we're going to comment a couple of minutes, or 2 minutes more or less, on the results. For those of you who are just listening, I'm also going to read the question again. So the first question that we posed was, do you think there is a need to activate industrial demand to provide flexibility in the power system? The majority of you answered yes, and only 6 of you out of 47, I think, 37, answered no. Mainly here, many of you see that there is a need because there is a high expected penetration of renewable energy, and therefore there is some need of flexibility. Later we would like to discuss also if this flexibility should come from the demand or if other technologies are interesting here. The second question that we posed was, which of the presented business models that Pablo presented to you before do you think has the highest potential? Here, most of you saw the highest business potential in what is already existing, energy bill management, which is basically you try to avoid consuming at the high peak times, and you try to consume more in the valley moments. Interesting here is also that almost none of you sees any potential in contracts with off-site variable renewable energy. We would like to also discuss that a little bit and why most of you don't see any potential in there. And then the third question was, which do you think is a key enabler for demand response in the industry? And here we see that most of you answered that the economic attractiveness of the services can enable demand response. Also, a significant share answered that the adequate technical requirements are very important if we want to attract more flexibility from the demand side. I don't know if Pablo or Tomas, you want to comment anything more on that? We will come back to these questions at the end of the presentation to try to have a little bit of discussion on that, if that's possible. But for now, I think we can continue with the barriers for the business models that we have identified, and Tomas Gomez will explain that.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Tomas Gomez, and I'm going to focus my presentation in the regulatory barriers we have identified in this project. This project has been long for 2 years now, and we are already in the final phase of the project. And yes, we are mainly working in that part, which is the regulatory part of the project. In this case, what we are going to do in this part of the presentation is to have a look to the different models that have been presented by Pablo before, and we will identify in our 6 target countries if we already seen barriers for development of these business models. And I'm going to introduce in each of these slides, at the end of the slide or in the bottom of the slide, you will see our conclusions in green, red, or orange. Green means that there are no barriers. Red are already legal barriers for the deployment of those models. And orange is a kind of intermediate solution, probably because it is in a transition phase. Regarding the first model, the one that you also identify as the most I would say feasible or the most attractive for already is the one that is existing in most of the countries, is the access to the market, direct access to the market, or because we have a market for energy, industrial demand has their own retailers or specific suppliers that they offer some kind of possibility for shifting demand according to energy market prices. And this is a quite normal model. It's implemented in all the countries. And in addition to the energy payment, that is part of the bill, there is the other part which are regulated costs, mainly network costs or other policy costs that we call that. And in this case, as happening in Spain or in other countries, you find that if you reduce the consumption mainly at peak hours, you will have some reductions on that. Therefore, you can react to those tariffs, and in that way you can reduce your bill in that way. And this is currently the most typical business model, and I think that in this case is something that, as you see up to now, is not very related to the introduction of renewable. It's true that because renewables are going to be more present in the future, maybe the volatility of the prices are going to be much higher, and maybe the patterns that industrial demand use today for reacting to this volatility is not rapid enough. Maybe in the future, the way of implementing flexibility will be much more rapid or much more changing according to the needs of the system or to the variability of the prices in the system. In model 2, this is something that is more elaborated in this case, because here is something that traditionally in power systems or in energy markets, system services as, for instance, reserves, capacity and energy reserves or balancing energy has been provided by traditional generators, conventional generators. Therefore, the challenge here, and for regulators is a challenge, is how to introduce demand providing also these services technically is prepared for doing that. And of course, industrial demand probably is the one that has more capabilities in that direction. But what we have in focus here is it's actually in the legislation exists or not barriers for allowing the participation of demand in this kind of services. And we can tell you that, for instance, regarding capacity markets and balancing energy, capacity reserves and balancing energy, in this case, most of the countries already allow the participation of demand, but still Italy and Spain don't. And in this case, they are, I would say, in a transition phase, especially in Italy, where they are discussing how to incorporate that, and probably Spain is the one that is more delayed in this task. But of course, the recommendations for the European Commission and for the new package, for the energy package, is clear on that. The demand should be allowed to participate in equal conditions, of course, with technical requirements in all these markets. On the other hand, you know that because maybe of the introduction of renewable, also capacity markets are introduced in some of those countries. There is a recent incorporation of UK. They have installed a capacity market. Italy and France are also in this situation. I would say that the participation of demand is very welcome. In this case, for instance, the experience in the ISOs in the United States is also very relevant in this case. Therefore, demand can participate or should be allowed to participate in capacity markets. And because of that, of course, they can get some remuneration that is going to be profitable for them. And finally, this is a quite standard situation in which most of those TSOs, they have load interruptibility programs. These kind of programs typically are all, because they were implemented for many years already. But what happens here is they are a little outside of the market. Typically they get some kind of administrative remuneration for that. The challenge here is how to introduce these kind of services more under the dynamics of markets, more in a competitive way, and being more efficient in the end for consumers. This is the situation. And now the two models that are probably more complicated to understand already in today's situation is Model 3 and Model 4, which are the contracts, or bilateral contracts between renewable generators located outside of the installations of the industrial consumer. And in Model 3, what we are claiming here is, well, the possibility of having bilateral contracts, long-term contracts for supplying the electricity coming from the generator to the consumer. This is totally hypothetical today. Why? Because most of the support of most of the countries have support for renewables today, and in that way the investment of renewable has been ensured in some way. If you as a promoter of renewable energy want to invest in Europe, you always rely in the way of having a support in order to ensure that you are going to recover your investment. If this continue, probably you don't have any need for getting any incentives for doing long-term bilateral contracts. This long-term bilateral contract, for instance, exists in Latin American countries where some generators, solar or wind generators, are earning some long-term options for supplying energy. But this is not the case up to now in Europe. What can happen in the future is for mature technologies like solar and wind, probably if the support is progressively reduced, this interest for having long-term contracts are going to be there, and for new wind generators or maybe solar generators, that could be a kind of a possibility. And that is something that the market will say, but we will see, but at this moment is totally hypothetical situation. And the thing I would say, but because of different different reasons is happening with Model 4. In here, the issue is we have a bilateral contract for balancing provision of, in this case, flexible demand is going to help intermittent renewable generators for reducing imbalance payments. And this is a possibility, but if we have a good design of the imbalance markets, and is the way Europe is working right now, this also bilateral relationship is not going to be needed. And that is, for instance, the case of countries like Belgium, Germany, UK, where they have already implemented single imbalance pricing. Under these single imbalance prices, the coalition or the bilateral relationship between demand or generation doesn't have any meaning, because you can get the same benefits directly participating in these balancing markets. Therefore, there is no going to be reasons for establishing this kind of bilateral relationship. And in case of dual imbalance prices, in that cases, maybe there is going to be a benefit for aggregation, but that is the case of Italy and Spain. But what happened in those countries is the aggregation between generation and demand still is not allowed by legislation. And also, Italy, for instance, is under discussion now if they are going to migrate to single imbalance pricing. Therefore, the conclusion I would say regarding Model 4 is it's true that the flexibility is going to be needed for counteract the imbalance that the renewable is creating, but with adequate designs of the imbalance markets, there will not be need for this kind of bilateral contracts. That could be achieved directly by participating in the markets, both of the sides, generation and demand. And finally, regarding the installation of the premises of the industrial demand of generators, this is also something related to the regulation. And in this case, the benefits are coming when, for instance, you have to pay volumetric tariffs, network tariffs, or other policy costs. And in that case, if you self-generate energy, your net energy consumption is going to be reduced. And if these volumetric tariffs are according to this net consumption, you will get some benefits directly for that. And this is the case already in Belgium and UK. The tariffs are applied directly to the net consumption. These are the benefits, and in this case, this model is very beneficial. But what happened, for instance, in Spain or in other countries, for instance, in the Flemish region of Belgium, is this self-consumed energy is not exempted of paying these network charges. Therefore, you have to pay also according to your gross consumption, not your net consumption. Therefore, the benefit that you can get, for instance, in Belgium or UK, because of that, you are not going to be allowed to obtain in the case of Spain or Belgium or Flemish region of Belgium. Therefore, the benefit of this model is totally related to these possibilities of avoiding some payments related with these network charges or policy costs. Therefore, this is the current situation. What we are going to have is, and as you see, there is a mix of cases that we have already described. The situation in countries is changing depending on the kind of model. But in general, still we need some policy recommendations to overcome these barriers. And this is going to be the object of the second presentation that we will have in 1 week's time. I think that's it from my side.
I think Fernando has to put the possibility to answer the questions. Yes, there it is. So we have two questions again. The first question is, do you think there is an added value in the synergy between industrial demand and on-site renewable generation? Our second question is, which do you think is the main barrier for full deployment of industrial demand response in the previously presented business cases in your country? On the answers, and then we leave some room for some open questions. The first question, I will repeat it again for those who haven't read it. Do you think there is an added value in the synergy between industrial demand and on-site renewable generation? Most of the people said yes, and this is because, yes, there is always a synergy, or yes, but just in case, demand can adapt to the renewable generation profile. The second question was, which do you think is the main barrier for deployment of industrial demand response in your country with respect to the previously presented business models? Here, most of the people answered, surprisingly, that the main barrier is that tariffs do not incentivize demand response. Also, a significant part mentioned that demand cannot participate in their country or that the technical requirements are not adequate. Thomas, do you want to add something on that, on the fact that the tariffs do not incentivize demand response?
Well, this is kind of, at least in the 6 countries that we have already reviewed for that, this is the model 1 that we presented before, and model 1 is, as I said before, there is energy changes in the price that you can have in day-ahead markets or intraday markets, and they are allowed to participate, of course, if they are not, if they don't see any benefit for that, but the prices are correctly set. They are there, and the market is open for that. And regarding network tariffs, in most of the countries, for industrial consumers which are connected in high voltage levels, are clearly, I would say, are clearly trying to incentivize that the demand should go to different times that there is no peak consumption, I would say, to the valley hours or whatever. Therefore, there is a time differentiation that can be as a possibility for reducing the bill. Therefore, I would say for me that would not be the right answer, but depends on countries. I cannot say for other countries, at least for the ones that probably I'm more aligned with the people answer that in some countries, specifically for these network services that we were talking about, research or the other capacity markets or the other things. In some cases, demand is not allowed still to participate. There are no technical yearly guidelines for that. Maybe, of course, the technical requirements could be, and they are not there also. Therefore, I'm more in line with that kind of answer. On the other hand, the other question that related to the synergy between generation and demand. Well, the markets are well designed. In terms of buying and selling energy, there is no difference between having generation and demand separated or aggregated, because they are participating in the market and they can get full participation. Of course, we can talk about the long-term contracts that we were talking about in order to stabilize long-term prices or long-term revenues. But in terms of market participation, there is not going to be a specific benefit. What the benefits are coming from are mainly for getting advantages of not paying network charges or other policy costs that are volumetric charges. And in that case, the second issue, which is that if the demand is well aligned with the generation pattern or the generation profile, you will get much better benefits, because in this case, your volumetric payments are going to be lower, clearly, for net demand. And that could be mainly the main advantages or the main synergies for that.
I think that's it for now. Fernando, if you want, you can open the discussion, and if people want to pose questions, we can comment on that, or other people can comment on it.